Lowell Institute headquarters in Alexandria, Virginia, this is On Human Flourishing. I'm Dr. Wayne Jonas. My guest today is Dr. Joseph Pizzorno. Dr. Pizzorno is one of the world's leading authorities on science-based natural and integrative medicine. Dr. Pizzorno is the founding president of Bastyr University, and under its leadership, Bastyr became the first fully accredited multidisciplinary university of natural medicine and the first NIH-funded center for alternative medicine research. He was appointed to the White House Commission on Complementary and Alternative Medicine Policy by President Bill Clinton in December of 2000, and to the Medicare Coverage Advisory Committee by President George W. Bush in 2002. In 2001, Dr. Pizzorno founded Salugenesis to develop innovative science-based artificial intelligence-aided systems that provide smart, personalized health promotion and integrated care guidance for the public and practitioners. A naturopathic physician, educator, researcher, and teacher, he is the author and co-author of over 10 books, including the best-selling Encyclopedia of Natural Medicine, sold over 2 million copies in 6 languages. Dr. Pizzorno joined us to talk about natural medicine and its connection to both mainstream and integrative medicine. So, Joe, it's really great to have you here on Human Flourishing. I'm really happy that you're able to come out and we were able to talk to you a little bit about how you got into healing and healthcare, natural healthcare, and what it means. And I'd like our listeners to hear a little bit about your story, about how did that happen. I know that you came from a scientific family and a scientific background. And so then how did you get into integrative, or I guess it was called natural, and it still is called natural medicine in these areas? How did that happen? What got you interested in that?
Well, an interesting question, and one of those strange stories that was unexpected but became meaningful. So way back in 1970, after graduating from college, I became quite interested in medical research. So I was working at the University of Washington School of Medicine, Department of Rheumatology, working with MDs and PhDs, trying to find a cure for arthritis. Now that particular lab was looking at gout and rheumatoid arthritis. So I thought my life was going to be research scientist in medicine, which I just love. I just love science. And then a strange thing happened. The woman who married my roommate from college, I went to a college called Harvey Mudd College. It's a science college. Anyway, this woman who I had known since college had suffered from juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. So she'd had swollen hands and swollen knees since she was a teenager. And then one day she said, well, my juvenile rheumatoid arthritis is cured. I said, wait a minute, what do you mean it's cured? This incurable condition. Right. I know it's incurable because right. I'm working with all these MDs and PhDs all over the country trying to find a cure for it. I said, what happened? She said, well, I went to a naturopathic doctor. I said, what's that? Because at this point, I didn't even know there were chiropractors. I thought they were just MDs and they're scientists and there's nothing else in the world. Else, right. Of course, a lot of people still think that, but that's not the reality. So you went to a naturopathic doctor. I said, okay, fine. So being inquisitive, I went to this naturopathic doctor and I asked him, what'd you do for my friend? He said, well, I taught her how to eat properly and detoxified her liver. So what's her liver and what she eats have to do with her knees and hands being swollen? And so now at this point, I had myself gone through some dietary and lifestyle changes and kind of for spiritual reasons decided to become vegetarian. And so becoming vegetarian, I saw a lot of changes in my body. So I asked one of the MDs I was working with, you're going to love this, Wayne. I asked him, I said, I've become vegetarian and I've seen a lot of changes in my body. Can you tell me what's going on? He said, well, there are errors in your observation because diet does not affect you. Really? Okay. Now remember, this is 40 years ago, 45 years ago, but that was...
It's all in your head, huh? It's
right,
all belief.
That was medical gospel at that point. Diet's not important.
Sure.
So I went to a naturopathic doctor, and I asked him exactly the same question. He goes over to his bookshelf, pulls Guyton Medical Physiology off his bookshelf, and at that point Guyton was the standard physiology textbook in conventional medical schools, and shows me physiologically what is happening in my body from becoming vegetarian. I thought, well, that's interesting. This naturopath knows physiology better than the MDs I'm working with. So then I said, well, can I spend a few days with you, see what you do with patients? And I saw, quote, miracle cure after miracle cure of people who were failures of conventional medicine, and they go to this guy, and with diet and lifestyle and herbs and vitamins and things, they get better. I thought, gee, I never thought about being a doctor, but wow, I think I'd like to do this instead of research. So therein was an opportunity. At that time, there's only one naturopathic medical school left in all of North America, and it just happened to be in Seattle. So I said, okay, fine, I think I'm going to do this instead. And so I enrolled and became a naturopathic doctor.
You say one naturopathic left. There had been
one
more,
naturopathic
right?
college left in the whole North America.
Yeah,
there have been a lot more than that.
Yes.
But, let's be real about it. The AMA won.
Yeah.
I mean, they basically went out to get rid of alternative medicine by whatever name,
right.
and they pretty much won.
Yeah.
But they didn't quite get rid of us.
Still an inkling left
There's
at that time.
one school left.
Oh, one school.
And you could actually say naturopathic medicine died 2 years before I enrolled, because that year, no students enrolled that year at the school.
Really?
When I enrolled in my class, there were only 7 of us.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so
Okay.
It was pretty hard times for
This was the
naturopathic medicine.
1970s? Yeah.
Yes.
All right.
So one of the challenges then, you asked me about Bastyr, so I went through the 4-year naturopathic medical school at that point, and on the one hand, it was really great because we had clinicians teaching us, real clinically relevant information and diagnosis and intervention we needed to know. But on the other hand, they weren't teachers. Basic sciences were basically taught out of conventional medical textbooks, so the education was actually fairly poor.
Yeah.
So when I graduated in 1975, I got myself appointed to the board of trustees of the school, which at that point had moved to Oregon because there was a better law for naturopathic medicine in Oregon. This is called National College of Naturopathic Medicine. I got myself elected to the board of trustees, and I, as a foolish young man, made a pledge to the student body saying that I would either bring the educational standards of NCNM up to modern educational expectations, or I would start my own school. Now, I had no idea why I said that, but 2 years later, I couldn't get them out of the bunker mentality, because their goal at that point was just staying alive.
Just to survive.
Regrowing, reestablishing the profession was not even on the radar screen. So I said that if naturopathic medicine was going to become an important part of the healthcare system, we had to develop accredited education. We had to develop modern textbooks. When I was in school, the most modern textbook had been written in the year I was born. That's how bad it was. We had to engage in research, and at that point, science with a capital S was kind of a bad word in naturopathic medicine, because science was the bludgeon used by the AMA to get rid of the profession by saying you're not scientific. I said, wait a minute, science doesn't belong to the MDs. Science is a tool and a way of looking at the world to understand what's real and what's not real. So doing research, then become much more sophisticated in the whole political arena and the public relations arena, because at that point, if you saw a story about natural medicine, it was typically about some child who got poisoned by eating an herb in somebody's backyard. It was nothing about what the medicine was really about. So I started Bastyr in 1978 with that idea, and I coined the term science-based natural medicine to give kind of a mission and vision to the institution. And also we named it Bastyr. At that point it was called John Bastyr College of Naturopathic Medicine, after our beloved teacher, John Bastyr. Okay. Did you ever have a chance to meet John?
I never met John Bastyr, no.
Oh, he was special. And I tell the students the reason we used that name was because he was a healer and a physician. I want our students to be healer physicians. So by physician I mean have high technical skills, diagnosis, treatment. You really have to know what you're doing. But the healer is that remarkable ability to facilitate within each of our patients their belief in their ability to become healthy.
Yes.
There's nothing more powerful than a patient's belief in their ability to become more healthy.
Okay.
So there's my life.
He was doing both. And so you started Bastyr from scratch and basically built it up,
So remember, this is way back in 1978.
Yeah, right.
I started Bastyr with a $200 donation from a grateful patient.
I see.
There was no money. There are no wealthy people to give us money. There are no foundations to give us money. There's no federal grants. I literally did it totally with an entrepreneurial spirit.
Wow.
So, and way back then, when I was 30 years old, I had nice dark gray hair,
right,
perfect health, and I invested those.
Limited vision into the struggle, so you jumped right in.
Yeah. If I knew then what I know now, I would have realized what I did was impossible.
So blindness sometimes is bliss and actually accomplishes stuff.
Yes.
That's great. Good. And Bastyr now has really become a premier school in naturopathic medicine, science-based natural medicine, has received NIH grants and a variety of other things, and really has sort of come into its own in terms of the educational, one of the main educational institutions in these areas.
Yes, and I think it was important what we accomplished with Bastyr, because no college or university of natural medicine had ever been accredited anywhere in the world, because conventional medicine had too much control over things, not just in terms of control over financial resources, but also control over those kinds of bodies that would accredit institutions such as ours. So by becoming the first accredited institution ever in this field, we started to regain the credibility that was so necessary.
Right.
And the reason I was able to get accreditation was, first off, not only did I have this science orientation, not to discredit healing and traditional therapies, but rather to say science is a tool we need to use. But for the basic sciences, I hired PhDs in the basic sciences.
Right.
The textbooks we used were conventional medicine textbooks, because one of the challenges we had with licensing was medical doctors would say, well, you don't have adequate education. I said, well, actually, my PhD in anatomy actually taught the same course to your MD students in medical school, and my PhD in physiology taught the same course as in medical school. So I was able to say we had actually the same faculty teaching the same courses. So I was able to say we really do have science.
Yes, right. And that sort of credibility also then has led to a growing recognition in the states around licensing. I think it's 25 states, something like that.
Almost. So when I graduated, we had 6 states licensing us, and we were a felony in 2 states.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Now we have 18 states licensing us.
18 states, okay.
And there's a very active licensing in another 10 states.
Right, great, super. Okay. You were there 22 years, is that right?
Right, as president for 22 years.
President for 22 years, great. So then when you left Bastyr, you started out you continued on the same path, I should say, but in a little different venue. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing in the last decade or so?
So, year 1999, I got a visit from the human resources director of Microsoft. He walked into my office and he said, we spend $60 million a year on healthcare for our employees, and we don't like the results. If I gave you a blank piece of paper, how would you redesign our healthcare system? I thought, well, that's interesting. So at this point, I've been president for quite some time, and being college president has its perks, but it's a really hard job, and I was kind of getting tired of it. So I said, well, that's interesting. How do we make this medicine available to more people than can only go to a practitioner? And became quite intrigued in 2 areas. One was so much of what had been, I say, belief in natural medicine for centuries, you might say, now had really solid scientific validation. It just hadn't been available before, but it's still hard to get access to, both by consumers as well as healthcare professionals. And I also have had a long-term interest in computers. Matter of fact, I built my first computer in 1977, and actually knew the guy who wrote DOS, that Bill Gates then purchased to go off to become a billionaire, and my friend went off into the woodwork. Okay. So I've had a long-term interest in computers, and I've been following the area of artificial intelligence and becoming more and more intrigued by the growing use of artificial intelligence in conventional medicine to help diagnose and treat disease. I think to myself, well, in many ways, disease is kind of an artifact, kind of a convenient way for conventional medicine to think about patients. So you have a standardized concept of a disease, you have a standardized way of diagnosing it, standardized way of treating it, that works fine. But it's not real, with some exceptions. So for example, juvenile diabetes, type 1 diabetes, that's a real disease. There's no pancreatic function left. Type 2 diabetes, that actually is much more complex. It's not simply your pancreas is dead. There are a dozen different reasons why people have diabetes. So we start looking at the person rather than the disease, and start recognizing, well, what we should be doing is not so much treating the symptoms of disease. We should be understanding why that person's physiology is not working the way it's supposed to. why it's not working the way it's supposed to, and then how do we get them to optimal function with the least invasive way of doing it. Now that sounds pretty good. Treating the person, individualization, optimization of health, all sounds pretty like a good idea. But when you then actually look at what does that mean, it turns out to be a very, very complex and difficult problem.
Right.
Because when you say physiology, well, what is physiology? Well, you might say what's the activity of enzymes in the body and the levels of chemicals in the body like vitamin C, the level of toxins in the body like mercury and lead, the level of hormones in the body like estrogen. You start looking at all this, there are about 4,000 enzymes in the body and about 4,000 elements and molecules in the body. So you just start thinking, well, how do you get a handle on all of that?
Yeah, it's a lot.
Then add to it, there are about 250 elements and chemicals in the environment we know are good for us, vitamins and minerals, and there are about 175 toxins in the environment that are now at high enough dosages, they're damaging our physiology. Then there are about 2 million single nucleotide polymorphisms in the genes that make our enzymes. You put it all together, it's incredibly complex, and a clinician, no matter how smart they are, no matter how dedicated they are, they can't keep all this physiology, biochemistry in their head. And that's where artificial intelligence is such a powerful tool. So I spent the last 15 years developing what could be called decision support tools that can be used both by doctors and by consumers to more deeply understand the uniqueness of their own biochemistry and how to optimize their health.
Okay, great. So this is really putting a brain and inserting the science into it. So, and then putting an interface on it that allows physicians and patients to make more evidence-based decisions around how to optimize their physiology. So, if you had another blank piece of paper today, a lot has happened since when you started this, and even in the last decade. A huge growth in our understanding of biochemistry, genetics, proteomics, physiology, the components of that. There's been an explosion of what's been called systems medicine, systems biology, and I like to use the term systems wellness for the kind of thing that you're doing. If you had another blank piece of paper today and said, here's our healthcare system, how would we design an optimal healthcare system? What's the problem and what are some of the solutions that you'd bring to the table?
President Obama, would you please appoint me the Surgeon General of the United States? Because I think I know how to fix things.
Yeah, I don't think that would work because the politics is so problematic that it might handcuff you more than possible. But what does healthcare need? Okay, to really advance? We've got rising costs. We've got lowered value. The outcomes are not keeping up with the costs, or not improving for the amount that we're investing in this. What do we need to try to sort of fix the healthcare system and create health?
So you want to have given this a lot of thought, and actually it might be fun for us to together write a white paper on this.
Okay.
So when I look at the optimal healthcare system, it's composed of three parts. And none of this is going to sound, the three parts you recognize: public health, primary care, and might say secondary, tertiary, whatever you want to call that, more specialized care. Three pieces. But I would dramatically change proportions of resources devoted to each of those. First off, public health. So as you well know, if you look at the history of public health has done more to improve the well-being of the human community than all the other healing arts combined, multiplied times 3. Okay. But when I say public health, I'm taking a much broader perspective of public health than simply contagion control. So I think about public health, for example, I would look at primary causes of disease. Let's look at one, nutritional deficiencies. I think few people are aware that the mineral content of food has decreased 50% the last 50 years. So even if a person's going to a grocery store trying to eat the fruits and vegetables that are being recommended, the nutrients simply aren't there. So I'm going to teach farmers how to grow food that's more nutrient dense. The second part is environmental toxicity. So I now lecture literally all over the world to both healthcare consumers as well as professionals, mainly doctors. And I'm now making the case that the primary driver of chronic disease today in industrialized societies is environmental toxicity. So public health would work with farmers to decrease the amount of toxins in their foods. Right now, 75% of the toxin load in the average person comes from the foods they eat.
Really?
Okay. So these, you've heard about them, herbicides and pesticides and insecticides by whatever names. These chemicals damage human physiology. And right now, if you look at people in the top 20% of chemical exposure, compare the bottom 20% of chemical exposure, they have over a 30-fold increased risk of diabetes.
Wow.
Because these chemicals are what are called insulin receptor site poisons.
Mm-hmm.
So the insulin that the body produces can't work because it can't get to the cells where they need to work.
So they make the body more resistant to the
Make the
insulin
body
they
more
produce,
resistant to insulin.
make it less effective.
Get insulin resistance, eventually the pancreas wears out, now they got diabetes. So much of the causes of disease today are actually passive in nature. We spend all our time talking about lifestyle and people eating better and getting exercise, which are all important, but there are a lot of these passive factors that are actually now the primary drivers of disease.
Right.
So we need to invest a lot more resources into public health, but public health from a broad perspective. The second area is primary care. And primary care doctor should be an amalgamation of today's naturopathic doctor and today's family practice MD. And the reason I say that is that the best place to deal with the underlying causes of disease is in the primary care setting. One is that's where you see most of the patients. Second, that's where patients are most willing to listen to what's being told to them. The naturopathic doctor is very, very good at understanding how to promote health. Now, the medical doctor is very, very good at diagnosing disease and treating acute disease when it needs the drugs. So we need to do both. The problem with conventional medicine today in the primary care setting is 9 out of 10 of the drugs being prescribed only treat symptoms without dealing with the underlying cause why people are sick. As a matter of fact, many of those drugs that are being prescribed actually make the underlying causes of disease worse. And if you want to, I can spend the next 2 hours giving you examples.
Can you give me one example of that?
Oh, sure. Let's look at osteoporosis. So, osteoporosis, you give a person an anti-inflammatory drug. Well, I'm sorry, osteoarthritis is what I meant to use.
Okay.
I can do osteoporosis too, but let's do osteoarthritis.
Osteoarthritis.
So osteoarthritis, and it's typically associated with inflammation in the knees and of the joints and degeneration of the cartilage. So the drugs that are used to deal with the inflammation and the pain, while they give short-term relief, they actually decrease the rate of regeneration of the cartilage. So you look at two groups of people, one given placebo, one given the drugs, and then do an x-ray looking at the thickness of the cartilage in their knees, follow them for several years. Those taking the drugs have thinner cartilage left over as compared to people who are using a placebo.
So it helps the pain, but it actually progresses. It accelerates the progression of their arthritis. I see.
Yes. Look at migraine headache, for example. Sumatriptan. The triptans are well-regarded intervention for dealing with the symptoms of migraine, and they work. They shorten the duration of migraine attack. However, 40% of people with migraines are having migraines because of a mitochondrial deficit. In other words, the mitochondria in the cells aren't producing enough ATP, so the neurons become more susceptible to environmental challenges, and you get migraine headaches. Sumatriptan is what's called an electron transport chain poison. So what happens is, the more you take sumatriptan, the poorer your mitochondria work. So you actually, a subset of people with migraines who take sumatriptan get more frequent migraines.
The electron transport chain is one of the main pathways for producing the ATP
Right.
that you're talking about.
85% of the ATP in the mitochondria is produced through the electron transport chain. So there's so many examples
So
there where,
example of that,
unexpected. Who would think that sumatriptan poisons mitochondria? But it does.
Okay, so there's some examples. Right. So then...
I also want to be real clear. I'm not anti-drugs.
Okay.
I think there's a place for drugs, but we're using them way, way too much.
Too much, yeah. I think we've seen that in the recent epidemic of opioid use for pain and drug use for pain, which is now causing many problems as it's helping. And so it's just the appropriate use of it has gotten out of hand, I think, in those areas. And the third area?
So the third area is we need the specialists, we need the hospitals. Okay, so I'm not saying throw them away. But what I'm saying is, if you do the first two parts a lot better, you don't need the third part. And as you know, the third part is where most of the healthcare dollars go at this point.
Right.
Because if you wait till somebody has a heart attack or advanced diabetes, at that point there's so much damage in the body. It requires a lot of medical technology and drugs and such to keep people alive, and that's where the majority of the dollars are going.
Right. Great. If you had a message to our listeners here, just the people who are listening, in terms of what they can do to not only help their own health, but help the country move in the direction of healing, salutogenesis, a health-creating system, what would you recommend to them? What should they do?
It comes down to the foundations of health. And the foundations of health start with what you eat. And I'm a great believer in people making change by the choices they make that then makes others change what they do as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, buy and eat organically grown food, not conventional grown food. The more organically grown food you eat, the more people will produce organically grown foods. And the less of the conventional grown foods you eat, the less the conventional grown foods will be produced. And I say that because of the two reasons I've already mentioned. Number one is organically grown foods have far less chemicals and metals in them, heavy metals in them, than conventionally grown foods, and they have more nutrients in them. That right there is the foundation of health. Now we can go from there. Probably this one which I would think number two most important, and I wouldn't have said this earlier, but I guess I'm older and grayer and smarter now. Make sure you're in a loving relationship. And it almost doesn't matter where that loving relationship is, but you better have it. The third part, which kind of overlaps the second one, is having meaning in life. People without meaning in life, they get sick. And I've seen patients like that where there's no meaning in life. I don't care what intervention you use, drugs or nice natural vitamins. If there's no meaning in life, they're not going to get better. And I've seen patients who have been chronically sick and they now have meaning in life, and it's remarkable how much better they get, how quickly they get better.
You've just described three of the main elements of our approach to human flourishing that we
put
in our salutogenic model. Some reason to be here, an important reason that's usually for doing things for others or something beyond yourself.
It almost doesn't matter in terms of what other people would say. What matters is what you
would say,
believe.
Right. It has to be meaningful for you.
Yes.
Right.
And you can have a monk somewhere whose dedication is to write the perfect poetry. Right. I mean, it doesn't really matter.
But they have to have passion about
Yes.
it, and it has to have meaning for them.
Yes.
And then a loving social relationship to be in for that can happen. And then the environment that they're getting exposed to, a nutrition diet.
Yes.
And
I can add a lot more.
toxins
You got to get exercise. Our bodies were designed to be physically active.
Yeah.
You have to avoid toxins. Having a spiritual life is probably a good idea as well. But if you have the loving life and purpose in life, that takes care of a lot of that. So there are many aspects we have to consider.
Yeah. So the message really to our national leaders, in case any of them want to listen to this, is that the public wants this. They need it.
Yes.
Our system needs it. And we need to rethink and re-envision and re-dialogue about how health happens in medicine and healthcare.
Yes.
So that's a great message. Well, Joe, thank you for everything you've done over the decades in these areas. It was fascinating to hear how you got into natural medicine, how you inserted the science basis for this, and now how you're trying to make it more widely available to the public and accessible to the public.
Yes.
So I appreciate all your work over the years and really look forward to great things in the future.
Well, Wayne, I appreciate that, and I want to say thank you for your friendship, and thank you for what you've done here with the Samueli Institute to create a system that will provide opportunity for others to move in the direction of health and get us out of this stuck place we are with the disease.
On Human Flourishing is the official podcast of Samueli Institute. To subscribe, visit the iTunes store and search for On Human Flourishing. The podcast is also available on our YouTube channel and on our blog at samueliinstitute.org/podcast. Our next episode of the podcast will feature Kent Bradley, former Chief Medical Officer of Safeway. Dr. Bradley's current endeavors bridge the gap between the arts and the individual's ability to heal. Please join us for this fascinating conversation on Monday, September 28th. Keep up to date with all our podcasts by subscribing in the iTunes store. Thank you.